So I was reading an article the other day about William Shatner and his reflections on being 90. And it was interesting in the article, Captain Kirk sharing wisdom at 90 and sharing little snippets about his life. And it was kind of a funny interview that someone did with him. But he said this when he was asked what he wished he knew in his 20s. He said, "Take it easy, nothing matters in the end." Take it easy, nothing matters in the end. Isn't it true that no thing matters in the end? That no actual thing matters. But how much time do we spend on things that don't need to matter? How much energy do we expend investing in things that don't need to matter? How much space do we rent in our minds to what doesn't matter? How much space do you rent in your mind to stories, circumstances, situations that don't need to be taking up that much rental space, that might be causing commotion, disturbance? Emma Curtis Hopkins is a New Thought author and creator, actually, of the New Thought movement. She was here at the birth of this movement, and we stand on her teachings as a mystic, as a feminist, as a theologian, as a spiritual leader. And she said this, she said, "The world will persist in exhibiting before you what you persist in affirming the world is." The world will persist in exhibiting before you what you persist in affirming the world is. Part of Shatner's comment there came from looking at the times in life that were hard, the times that were struggle, and saying how difficult they were. And, he wishes he knew that he could just let go of that. And it's for each one of us to ask ourselves, how can we stay true to what is important? How can we live a life where we stay true to what is important? How can we look authentically at what is not working, what we might be doing, what we might be activating in our own lives, in our own minds, and in our own world that is not helpful to the core of our being? Can we look at what matters most? And can we live a life where what matters most is at the forefront, is at the forefront of what we are doing, what we are living, at the forefront of our minds? All too often, we hop from champagne to problem to champagne problem. Do you know what I'm talking about? I'm not just talking about drinking champagne and worrying about your dog's nails being cut. But I'm talking about the things that take our attention, take our minds, and break our hearts. That with sometimes a little more sleep, a broader perspective, a deeper understanding, or with the presence of wisdom, we realize they dissolve. They dissolve or they transmute. What we thought was real, what we thought was solid, what we thought had to be our experience was actually fluid, was actually moving, and that there was actually some choice there. The little things that get our focus and can derail us that really don't deserve space in our minds. And oftentimes there are the big things that warrant space in our mind, that warrant our time, our attention, our focus. But far too often we're consumed or we're drained by the little things that we often miss what matters. Do you know what I'm talking about? That we miss what matters? So often we address a lot of the little insignificant things, but we fail to make that phone call or have that conscious conversation or do something that will create the next right moment for ourselves and our world, while we're turned away looking at the commotion looking at the things and giving attention and time to the things that don't matter. If you read a lot about, how to wisely spend your time, one of the biggest things is not to just go into the day without a plan. Because what happens? This person grabs you, that phone call grabs you, that beep grabs you, that notice grabs you, that shiny little thing grabs you, right? Whatever it is, and you end up just going through the motions of your day, going through the motions of life, reacting or addressing what arrives on your front porch. All the time wanting or hoping that other areas of life will move forward. How many of us put off what matters and give space to what doesn't need to matter as much? Life is often building and expanding, or it's stabilizing, or it's unraveling. At least that's what it feels like, right? It feels like sometimes there are phases where we're building, we're growing, we're expanding, something's good, right? And then times when it's just like, there's just nothing happening, or it's like, there's just a little bit of stability here. Let me stay here. Let me keep this. Or like, I can't keep it together. It's falling apart. Here we go again. And what happens in the mind in those stages, those phases, are that when we're building and expanding, it can feel stressful. We can lose awareness and lose sight of what's important. We can mistake the growth and the building for who we are. The ego can get involved, and the ego can be so proud of the growth. And then when it sees the unraveling, there's the temptation to unravel with it. The unraveling can be an experience of fear. We can feel like we're going to shut down. We can miss the gifts of the moment. The ego in that situation says, I'm a disaster. It's never going to work for me. This is too much. And at those stabilizing times, when you'd think you can just breathe deeply and enjoy, what's the tendency of the mind? What's the tendency of the ego? Nothing's happening. There's not enough stimulation here. Life is boring. There's nothing. I'm unengaged. I'm uninterested. There's not enough change or not enough shift. Nothing's growing. Nothing's knocking at my door, unraveling. Maybe I don't matter. Maybe I'm insignificant or invisible. And our tendency in the human condition is to be caught up in the shifts, to be caught up in those phases and stages of creation and destruction, and to believe, in fact, that we are the ones building, stabilizing, unraveling, that we are the experience rather than the observer. But the truth is, we are the observer. We are the constant. We are one with that which doesn't shift in the midst of shift itself. And when we can tune into that truth, we're in presence and we find the gifts. How do I react to growing, building, to stabilizing, to unraveling? How do each one of us, how do you react to those experiences in life? There's a story that has been shared for some time in the Taoist tradition. It's the story of the farmer and the horse. You've probably heard it. One day, this farmer's horse runs away, and the neighbor comes over and says, I'm here to commiserate with you. Oh no, I'm so sorry about your horse. I know how important a horse is to a farmer. And the farmer says, who knows what's good or bad? Odd response. The neighbor's confused. It's clearly terrible. What is a farmer without his horse? The horse is the most valuable thing he owns. But the horse comes back the next day, and he brings with him 12 feral horses. The neighbor comes back over to celebrate. Congratulations on your great fortune. This is incredible. This is amazing. You have 12 now? It's like you paid into Bitcoin. You never could have made that much money. You bought a house in Colorado, didn't you? Right before the market went up. Gosh, lucky one. You're so lucky, it's so good. And the neighbor says, congratulations on your great fortune. And the farmer replies again, who knows what's good or bad? And the next day, the farmer's son is taming one of the wild horses, and he's thrown and he breaks his leg. And the neighbor comes back over. I'm so sorry for your son. This is terrible. I'm so sorry. I can't believe he broke his leg. And the farmer repeats, who knows what's good or bad? Sure enough, the next day, the army comes through the village and is gathering able-bodied gentlemen, young men to go fight in the war, but the son is spared because of his broken leg. What do you think the neighbor says? And it goes on and on and on. You can fill in the blanks, we can write our stories, and so does life. Go on and on and on. This is happening with that person. This happened at that time in my life. If it weren't for this, oh, this is happening, that's happening. This is what it looks like, that's what it looks like. It goes on, and the opportunity to carry around a story in life builds. We label experiences as good and bad, and we build a storyline for our lives and for the lives around us and the lives of those we presence, and we live within the confines of that story. Emma Curtis Hopkins says, you have no idea how much of the inefficiency of mankind comes from thinking about the wrongdoings of others and ourselves. There's nothing more miserable than to feel that by some mistake in life you have not amounted to what you might have, and that your misfortunes all hinge on that mistake. That our misfortunes can hinge on one problem. Eric Butterworth, Unity teacher, administrator, and author, says wherever a problem appears, there is a force field set up around it, which is the activity of the divine law of adjustment, seeking to resolve the problem into a pattern that is good. Let's breathe into that. Wherever a problem appears, there is a force field set up around it, which is the activity of the divine law of adjustment, seeking to resolve the problem into a pattern of good. Can we believe that? Can we trust that? Can we stand in that and co-create it? The point is that we can go up and down with the stories of our lives or the world around us, or the lives of others. But what if instead we decide to get off that wave, get off that Ferris wheel, and recognize that we are the steady, that God, the grand overall design, that presence itself is the constant, and that it is more than enough, it is fit enough, it is equipped enough to presence all of the building up and all of the unraveling. I am that I am. The I am that is the one present at every moment of life, in every moment of expression. Emma Curtis said, if God is your world, what have you to fear? If trusting in the overall design, more than the moment, more than the appearance, has our attention, then what is there to fear? because we recognize that with our sense consciousness, with our vision, we can't always see what's good or bad in a moment, and that the story, we don't need to pick up the story because it's always evolving, and it's a story that never ends. The yin-yang is a symbol that represents this dynamic in life, this dynamic of the human condition. You have one side that merges into another, that swirls and melts into another, and you have each side actually having contents of the other contained within them, all complementing each other in a flow of life as a greater whole. Reminding us that we can't separate things and stand in a moment, in a problem, or in good and bad. That life itself is more whole than that. So can we simply recognize that life is always changing, it is always shifting, that the appearance that is around us is always moving. But there is the me, the you that shows up for it that is constant. And in fact, when we recognize that, we see a whole different focus. When we turn our focus within, we see that there is a building, a stabilizing, and an unraveling that happens spiritually all the time, but all at the same time. And it's good. It's actually life living itself. There is a releasing of what is no longer necessary. There is a drawing forth of what is needed. And there is a harmonizing faculty that does what Eric Butterworth said, opens up the expression for the pattern of good with a capital G. If we try to stop the outer from crumbling, from building, from its activity, we're stopping creation. But we can take heart that there's a principle and a practice within that helps us show up for it with wholeness, with presence, with the observer self in the midst of all of it that we can count on. When we turn our focus to the internal, we see other patterns, patterns of spiritual growth, patterns of great harmonizing. So can we do the best with what is before us in each moment and center our thoughts on God? I do the best with what is before me in each moment, and I center my thoughts on God. What does that mean to center our thoughts on God? Center our thoughts on a pattern of good, on trusting a pattern of good is available every moment, in every situation. Focus and center our thoughts on peace, on wisdom, on love, on light, on the good that is in all of us, that is each of us. So in the midst of the human condition, and you fill in the blank, whatever it is that you're presencing in your own being, in your own world, in your own life, in our greater experience of the collective together, a feeling like maybe we're not enough, or we don't have enough, or there are no answers, or there's no resolution, or like we can't handle something, or we're not strong enough, or there's something that's insurmountable, or maybe we're feeling insignificant and unseen, or maybe we're not getting our way, things aren't going the way we want them to go, or the people in our lives aren't showing up the way we want them to show up, or the world itself isn't showing up, or the church isn't showing up. Whatever it is, fill in the blank. Bring it all to the table. It's okay. It's the human condition. And it's nothing to fear. My probably favorite author, Sig Paulson, said, as love expands its operation in our lives, we are lifted more and more into the harmony of the universe, and a new order is developed in our experience. We are plugged into the source of all good, the light and the love of our being. And we are no longer so dependent on other people or certain sets of patterns in the outer world for our happiness. This does not mean that we do not appreciate others in the outer world. In fact, we will appreciate them more because we no longer have to expend quite so much energy trying to enforce our tight little patterns of order, what we think is right or wrong on them. We no longer have to pass judgment quite so often or violently on the appearances and disappearances of the outer scene. Let's breathe into that. We no longer have to pass judgment quite so often or so violently on the appearances and disappearances of the outer scene. Doesn't that sound like freedom? Our sense of order becomes less rigid. It acquires a flexibility that enables us to flow with life rather than to fight our way through a world that seems intent on going its own way, particularly when we try to hold it in a certain pattern of behavior or stability. That flexibility is the yin-yang, the swirl, the flow of life, and being one with the flow of life, even in the midst of any condition. So at each stage, we do the best with what is before us. We share with those we're safe with. We trust the grace of God is sufficient. We use the principles. We engage and expand the practice. Where it feels like there is no way, we declare there is a way and pray to become the way, standing on that determination. We take baby steps with what is before us, keeping our hearts and our minds open and centered. And we can also remind ourselves that no things matter. And hey, at least we're not in the mouth of a whale. Did anyone hear that one this week? In the mouth of a whale. It's a good story. It's a good story. This guy up in New England got swallowed. He was diving and he got swallowed by a whale. And he realized he was in the mouth of a whale. And then guess what happened? Swam around and he got spat back out. Flew feet first straight into the air. Doesn't that feel like life sometimes? In the mouth of a whale and spat back out. And you know, he was there telling his story, and I'm pretty sure he had a cigarette. No judgment. I might need a cigarette if I just got out of the mouth of a whale. But he's just sitting there telling his story. Probably grateful. Realizing nothing really matters in the end. No thing matters in the end. It's a good story, but the spiritual goal, the key of the mystic, is to drop the story. To drop the story. The mystic doesn't have a story because it shows up to what is without the distractions of fault, blame, renting space in the mind, concern about the details of the story and building evidence. The mystic steps into each moment without a story, just present to what is, renting space in the mind only to the glory of wisdom, peace, and love. Charles Fillmore said, "Every man who accomplishes things sees first in his mind what he wishes to do. He puts away all doubt. It makes no difference how small or large the thing you want to do may be. If you have unlimited confidence in your ability to do it, you will." He said, "The mind of the spirit will guide you in perfect ways. The mind of the Spirit will guide you in perfect ways, even in the minute details of your life, if you will let it do so. So will we rent the space in our minds to the highest and the holiest? Namaste.